that unlock moment is going to be when AI and quantum come together. And there's this, I mean, the people listening and watching this, go look at how LLMs become LQMs that allow then you to bring that true reasoning and thought process into quantum. Because the power of quantum is that it can come up with all the conclusions at the same time. Yeah. So it can then say, what is the drug that we should pursue to put into trials, rather than like, here's 100 possibilities. And that computing power, it then becomes almost unlimited. And I think that's going to be a real pivotal moment in not just quantum, but AI as well. When you put the two together, that's going to be a massive unlock. With AI, you can launch attacks that will keep self-modifying and trying to find weaknesses millions of times an hour. It's truly kind of frightening that you're going to be under that sort of scrutiny at some point. You may have seen this in the press. They call it Q-Day, and Q-Day is the day where quantum can break all known encryption using Shor's algorithm. It may have happened. We don't know, because nation states may choose not to publicize it.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today, I am sitting down with Andy Lever. He is the CEO of Arqit and also an operating partner and investing partner at Notion Capital. Today, we're going to look at how shifts in technology are really changing how enterprise works. We're going to talk AI, we're going to talk quantum, and we're going to talk about the previous shifts from cloud and how that was framed as a reset. But in fact, some things stay the same. And I'm going to try and get some of that out of Andy, because Andy has really been around and seen it all as a CEO that has taken companies public, as an investor that have helped take companies public, and as an investor that, of course, have done multiple very high profile Series A's.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Andy, I waffled a bit through my intro. I want to give you the opportunity to tell everyone who you are, how you got to be where you are today, so that they know exactly the capacity of the person we're with.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Hey, so let me kind of give the short version. So I went to university and thought I wanted to be a silicon designer. Got very excited about way back kind of designing microprocessors. A little company called Microsoft came along and said, you shouldn't be doing hardware, you should be doing software. So I did a kind of very swift exit left, spent a lot of time in Seattle, ended up wanting to do my MBA. So wanted to do it with a large organization. I had got to work with GE in the era of Jack Welch, which was quite incredible. And then the Silicon Valley came knocking on the door and said, come see us. I did, went down there. It kind of blew my mind. Like I think it would have done for anyone back then. And joined a small little startup called Ariba, who said, hey, we want to get going in Europe, go set it up. So I moved back, put the flag in the ground next to the airport, and was on a wild ride then of going public. Joining super early was super interesting. I don't know if people remember March 2001, the NASDAQ went from like 5,000 to about 1,000 in a matter of weeks. So it was like, should I go running back to big tech and big industry? But I didn't. I kind of pushed forward. So put me on the journey of doing 5 companies, joining super early and getting through IPO. So Ariba, SuccessFactors, Bazaarvoice, Workday, and most recently Hortonworks. And then decided I wanted to give something back. I'm like, where's the big companies in Europe? So that's when I got into investing and advising and my journey with Notion. And then I made the classic mistake of falling in love with a company, Arqit, who we can talk about later, I'm sure, but I'm now CEO there. And again, one of the things I kind of try to avoid being the CEO of a publicly listed company because of everything that goes around that. But here I am. I'm the CEO of a publicly listed company.
And before we go and talk about technology shifts and how they're affecting and what's happening right now with AI and what you believe is in store for us with quantum, and in that connection, I think we should talk about Arqit in more detail. But before we go there, I want to just double click on your experience taking companies through IPOs, because this is, of course, experience that not a lot of people have, especially not in Europe. You know, this, if you could just talk through your experience doing that and your core learnings, and literally you can take it from the beginning and then all the way up to your latest company.
Sure. I think one of the things, when companies get formed is it tends to be the CEO and the founding team tend to come from the technical side. Yeah. And they've had often a really great idea, a brilliant idea, and they've tried it with a few kind of early, design with customers or something. And then when they get to the point of saying, okay, we're ready to scale, we're going to raise some money, they don't really understand kind of the person or the type of person they need that's going to help them scale the business from a go-to-market perspective. And I just started to see time and time again that complete car crash of, they either delegate the responsibility to somebody else and say, just go find someone to lead our go-to-market function. Or they try to interview themselves and they come back and go, you know what, I've never interviewed anyone like this before. They sound pretty good. And I always say to them, well, listen, if a salesperson can't sell themselves, then they're not going to be able to sell anything, so they've obviously sold you pretty well. And then you meet them and often they're a good person, but you kind of say to them, hey, you've got to think, I think in Europe, and I'm talking particularly about Europe now, the kind of 1 to 3, the 3 to 10, the 10 to 30, and the 30 plus are all very distinct phases of growth for your organization. I'm talking about revenue, yeah? And the person that you need may be different for each part of that stage of growth, and their skills may be different and their background may be different. And I think in Europe, we're starting to figure some of that out. And we often get overexcited when a company gets to 10 million of revenue and we think that's it, they've cracked it, they're brilliant, they're amazing, they're going to be like $1 billion company. But to me, the absolute valley of death is the 10 to 30 journey. I mean, so many companies raise a B, they go on that 10 to 30 journey and they just get stuck and they can't get beyond 30. And then we have this problem of growth equity or growth revenue in Europe. It's a limited pool to raise from. And before they know it, they end up being either a national champion, like, hey, we're the best at this in this country, and they never get beyond it. Or they just end up saying, hey, we're just going to end up a part of a bigger organization and kind of accept that. And to me, it's frustrating. And that's the cycle that I really wanted to try and break when I got into venture.
Yeah. And Notion, of course, have produced a lot of content, and I know you work very closely with Stephen Millett, but you've produced a lot of content on exactly this point of scaling through the different stages, and specifically also from B and onwards. Right. Andy, I'd love to ask you if you can talk about the zero in on the 10 to 30 million stage. How do you unlock when you get there and you then get stuck? What are the things that you see that founders really need to focus in on, and what are the recipe to then get it right?
When you get to 10, it's really all about new names and champions. So you want to get as many net new name customers on board as possible. Yeah. The first company that really proved this out with Salesforce, of course, when you can get your net revenue retention really moving, and when you get into the absolute top performing companies, they're kind of 150% plus. So for every dollar in the original deal, they'll generate $1.50 plus in subsequent renewals. And lightening the load on the need to get those new names in the door. And I think that division, it's kind of like one sales motion becomes two sales motions and they start to think about that. Also, going international is a big part of this, because I think any company, if they're really good and have a smart product, could get to $10 million and be a national champion, the best at this in a country. And I'll kind of quote TechWolf, they said it to me really clearly. They raised their money and said, we kind of wish we'd skipped some of the European expansion and just gone straight to the US. Yeah. Which, whether we like it or not, is the largest software market on the planet. And it's one geography, one set of laws, one language. And if you can crack that, the scalability is just enormous.
Everyone is talking about how AI is rewriting the rules. I think there are a lot of people that are looking at fabled firms like Notion that have really built their name in SaaS and enterprise, and thinking, how are they moving now? How are they maneuvering this? Because it is a platform shift. A lot of talking about the rules of SaaS being broken. We're using the word SaaSpocalypse and that type of thing. I'd love to ask you if you agree on this foundational belief that everything's changed now, the rule book is rewritten, and we gotta really readjust everything we do as SaaS investors and as SaaS founders, or is it a bit overdone by the media? And in reality, yes, we all got to be building with AI, clearly. But other than that, the game isn't that changed.
So I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, and it was the NASDAQ's 55th birthday, which was really interesting because the vast majority, if not all the companies listed on there, would be perceived as yesterday, based upon what you just said. Yeah. And I was talking to, I won't name them because I think they're all in the same boat, basically. But they were saying, listen, I'll make these numbers up. I might have 100 million of revenue today, 100 million of revenue backlog, and 100 million of cash, but the market value is made 100 million. Okay, it makes no sense. And when you talk to, I spend time with our banks, other banks, family offices, high net worths, etc. They've just basically discounted the out years to zero because they believe that AI is moving so quickly that they're just going to be completely disrupted and that future revenue is not guaranteed anymore. Yeah. And they're living off cash was kind of the way they think about it. So you've got this brutal reality on one side, whether it's right or wrong, that's what they believe. Okay. On the other side, we've got these mega IPOs about to arrive. SpaceX rumored to be 1.5 trillion IPO. There was the leaked OpenAI cap table. You look at it, which by the way wasn't amazing returns for a lot of the VCs on there when you look at it, in kind of multiple numbers. So
Yeah, no
I think they
surprise.
got it. They got in line. The amazing thing about that capital though was 20% was the employee stock option pool, which is really high. So 20% of that company's employee owned, which is it's going to be good
Yeah,
for a lot of
very
people, right? But back to kind of how we think about Notion. I always think that people overestimate the ability of enterprise companies to absorb new technology. Okay. I've lived that world. So I was at GE, and I was running a large part at a very young age, which was crazy, part of our IT real estate. And just moving to client server when we kind of had the kind of mini mainframe kind of back end previously took years. Okay. So I think we're still very much in the experimental phase where organizations are trying to empower people with tools, but they mostly are using enterprise software vendors to give them that enablement today. And I think if you can transition to say we're AI native and we have the unlock, and we're going to make, I think by the way, pricing is going to change a lot. We've got to been through the perceive, we're going through tokens now, and I think there'll probably be another evolution of pricing. Is just that flexibility is going to be tough for investors as well, because they're going to be saying, well, how do you forecast that? How do you think about that when you're in this experimentation world? So I just look at companies now and I look at architecturally how they're changing, how their go-to-market is changing, and also the messaging to their existing customers and potential new customers about what that means in terms of their usage of their products. And often the enterprise will come back and say, that's really great. We'll put that in Q4 or we'll put that in Q1 or something like that. It's not like we're going to do that instantly because they've got a massive workload to get through already.
I continue to be surprised at how little excitement there is in this current era around consumer, because as a consumer, you're super happy every time a new feature ships and it doesn't break anything for you. The other day, my Spotify asked me if I wanted to mix my playlist, and then I just started doing super cool shifts from one song to the next one. I was like, what is this? And then it was literally AI generated shift in between two songs, and it sounded really awesome and gave me an experience where I was like, this is completely wow. You don't want any of that happening as an enterprise customer. So I'm surprised that VCs are more attentive to what's happening in the consumer space and doubling down there, but that's just my take.
But just to cut in real quick, sorry, and I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but one of the big things that happened, if you remember when cloud came in, it was the time where people like Apple were releasing the iPhone and iPod and things like that, and iPad, and people were turning up at the office with more compute power in their pocket than they had in the office. Do you remember? So everyone was bringing their own devices and they were like using their own. So bring your own device. And that's where shadow IT all started. Do you remember? Like IT were like, we're going to do an audit what people are using. And they're like, oh my God, none of these are any of our tools. Yeah. And I think that's happening again. Yeah. You've got shadow AI happening, which is really dangerous from an IP perspective, because just look at this leak from Anthropic, where, the source code was downloaded, rerun in Python and kind of made available very quickly on alternate servers. People are taking company sensitive information and putting it straight into like OpenAI and Claude without their employees having no knowledge, because there's no guardrails, because they don't know what the guardrails should be. So we're in this really messy middle right now.
I guess this is a perfect transition to talk a bit about Arqit. Tell everyone in the audience, what is Arqit? How did you get involved? I love the story. You shared it earlier, but do it in a bit more detail. You fell in love with Arqit as being one of the investors at Notion and said, wait a second, I know how to take a company IPO. I'll join as a CEO there. and you're full-fledged on the team and running that. I'd love you to tell everyone about that story because I think it's a cool one.
Yeah, I'll tell you about the genesis of the company real quick. Yeah. So if you ever get the chance to meet people who were there when the kind of web came into being, they'll tell you that they never really finished it. Okay. And there's a couple of things that were missing. Security was missing, identity was missing, and the kind of one-to-one communication was missing. Hence things like WhatsApp coming along and things like that. But a part of that was the PKI infrastructure that we all take for granted now. We're sat here chatting away and we're using PKI. It's just working away in the background and we assume it's safe and, everything's secure. Quantum was super theoretical, but when people started to think about, well, what can we use quantum for? There was a guy called Peter Shor who came up with the Shor algorithm. And quite quickly, he proved that you could break all known encryption using quantum computers. Yeah. I was like, wow, that's kind of scary, because we all just take for granted that it's just going to carry on, being secure. And what Arqit did was look at, well, what's the gold standard of security today? And they looked at what the military do. And the military will do things like, hey, when you're encoding a fighter jet, people literally have briefcases handcuffed to their wrists, and they come along and plug bits of hardware in, and they say, well, if we could change that into software, what would that look like? And that was the genesis of the company. They realized quite quickly they're onto something, and I was just fascinated by the company. I mean, I was, it's not often you get to work at a software company that also has quantum physicists and cryptographers and things like that in it, which is, people I never worked with before. So it just kind of blew my mind that there are people that just do these complex mathematical equations proving whether things are secure, not secure, etc. Before I knew it, it was, so who's run a public company before? And kind of the eyes fell on me, and I was like, yeah. They said, do you want to do it? I'm like, not really. I said, do you? I said, well, I think I do actually. There's this kind of young person's voice came out of like, I'm quite excited about this. So yeah, here I am loving it. It's every day. Even though I've been in this industry for a while, you learn something new every day. It's fascinating.
Tell me a bit about the state of enterprise security today, put it in the context of AI. Are we in a safe place in general, do you think, or are we really seeing a momentous shift that's making everything quite different?
There's a number of different lenses to look at that, and kind of let me explain. There's one lens which is all about the kind of agentic world that we're getting into, where enterprises are worried about, if I turn things over to agents, the identity and authentication of those agents is something they should be worried about and maybe aren't worried about enough. There's kind of that side through AI. The other side is you may hear these terms like data sovereignty, digital sovereignty, etc. So the Cloud Act in the US, which allows the US government to subpoena an organization to say, we want to look at that data in the cloud, without telling the end owner of that data that it's happened, I think has worried a lot of people. So you hear a lot about data sovereignty now saying, okay, I want my data to land in my sovereign territory. And if there's any extension of that and it moves into other geos, I want to protect that as well. So it looks like my own network, no matter where it resides on the planet. So if my data does get stolen, then
I literally yesterday did a live announcement episode with Dominic from High Ground, who are doing almost exactly that on-site security for ensuring that the systems stay up and running, and it's exactly about sovereignty and the fact that you can't let anyone else own it than you.
We see that use case all the time, and I think that's going to be a whole emerging new sector, personally, data sovereignty. And the other part that I think we are fascinated by is, so quantum computers today are not available at scale, and more importantly, they're not super reliable. Okay, so the threat today is the harvest now, decrypt later. So you may have data that's stolen at scale, and you think, well, it's secure because it's encrypted in some sort of way, but that's the harvest now. The decrypt later is once quantum becomes available, that data, if it's got any longevity and time availability can be decrypted later and used. So I think the bad actors
Do
in the
we see a
world,
lot of that happening? That we actually have a bit of a cybersecurity bomb waiting to go off because there's a lot of harvest operations now?
yeah. So one of our customers is Sparkle in Italy, and they're one of the largest providers of undersea cables. So these are the big infrastructure cables that connects, continents, countries together. And you see this in the news all the time. Boats come along, they're dragging their anchors, they're pulling up cables. So they're trying to intercept data in motion to say, hey, if we can just suck up this data, store it away, then we can decrypt that later. And I think there's lots and lots of different levels of worry about this, and lots of different levels of worry about when does quantum become available at scale reliably. But I think certainly within the next, well, Google just pulled forward their date by which they think quantum will be available to at scale decrypt information to 2029. So that's literally 3 years away that becomes a reality.
And what does the future then look like in your view?
I think the big call to action, and the US government are probably the fastest movers on this. You're seeing it across a kind of patchwork across Europe of people saying, this is not a rip and replace and just upgrade your security. This is like a kind of bottoms up moment of rethinking your entire landscape in terms of making it crypto agile to make sure that you're protected against quantum. Because you may have seen this in the press, they call it Q Day. And Q Day is the day where quantum can break all known encryption using Shor's algorithm. Yeah. And it may have happened. We don't know, because nation states may choose not to publicize it. Okay. So it may have happened. I don't know. And I'm kind of 50-50 on this. I've heard people actually with security background stand on stage and say it has happened. They haven't got proof though. But that's going to happen in the next couple of years.
And when you say did you call it crypto agile?
Crypto agile. Yes.
And
Yeah.
that explain that concept to everyone so we understand, and then we can unpack how we get there, because this is of course important for every single tech company in Europe to understand.
So you've got you in your estate, you will have, and I'm talking about enterprises, because enterprises grow through acquisition, mergers, divestitures, and it's impossible to have, unless you're a brand new startup, to have a perfect estate of IT. Yeah, it will be a mixture of everything. And one of the big banks I went to recently, I walked around their data center, and data centers are there will be people who offend me saying this. Oh, I think they're kind of boring. It's like cages with flashing lights, right? But I got to the end, and there in this cage was like two guys kind of hammering away on terminals. And I was looking at going, what? And they said, oh, here's the guy that's looking after our Fortran code, and here's the guy looking after our COBOL code. This is a bank, a tier one bank. Okay. So you look at that, you're like, wow, so we've got tech that will never go into the cloud all the way back to like the 70s that's still running in data centers. So crypto agile is to say, if you did an inventory of your entire estate across all those different levels of security and legacy tech, what would you need to do to secure that, to make sure they all move up to the same level and have the ability to be agile in defending that perimeter? The other part with data sovereignty as well is, Germany's been very active on this, and so is Saudi Arabia, saying, hey, we only want our data in our country and never to leave our borders. The other way to think about this is with data sovereignty solutions is to say, if our data did leave and it resided on another server, how can we ensure that they never have the keys to be able to decrypt that if it's actually quantum secure as well? So there's a couple of different ways of thinking about it. And I think most organizations have not even started the discovery. So there's a whole sector that Gartner now talk about automated crypto discovery and inventory, which is just saying, what does my landscape look like from an ability to withstand an attack? With AI, you can launch attacks that will keep self-modifying and trying to find weaknesses millions of times an hour. It's truly kind of frightening that you're going to be under that sort of scrutiny at some point. The other part is sometimes if the Cloud Act comes in, you don't even know if your data has been legally taken or illegally taken. It's really hard to tell, which puts you in an even worse position. Yeah.
You're talking about being crypto agile and getting secure against a quantum attack. Can you get to that? Is it possible?
That's what we do. So we do, our way of fixing this is what we call symmetric keys. Okay. Symmetric keys means that the keys are never transmitted between the two endpoints. so they can't be intercepted. And also at the endpoints, we can do, so that's data in transit, data at rest is encrypted, and then data in process. So we work with people like Intel, where we put our encryption technology in a trusted enclave on device so that it never leaves the silicon. Yeah. So the points of interception are absolutely minimized. It's fully encrypted. And if it's ever intercepted and harvested, then they don't have the keys anyway to be able to decrypt it. And because the keys never get transmitted, it means they can't be intercepted either. So that's a replication of the kind of gold standard hard cryptography I talked about from a kind of a military perspective. The complication in today's world comes from the sheer amount. The vast majority of data now is machine generated. It's not human generated. You know, you look at like an ERP system, the data it generates is minuscule compared to, like, look at a smart city, you know, the data that comes from traffic lights and crossings and things like that. And then you layer on now autonomous vehicles. So in the civil world, you know, I was following a Waymo last night in London, by the way, and it still freaks me out when I look at it and I see no one driving. But I keep thinking about the data that's flowing in and out of that vehicle, and multiply that by all the cities and all the cars in the world. It's massive amounts of data that's going on. And I think the bit that is kind of the most worrying in today's world is, you know, warfare has turned very much into drone warfare with kind of edge networks and the ability to encrypt that as well and keep those items safe when they are autonomous. They're just doing their own thing, you know. So I just look at it and think the problem of security now is thousands, if not millions fold of what it was when PKI came along. It's a completely different world.
I want to go then to another topic that's connected to this, of course, because we got into this conversation about security on the back of you mentioning that quantum will get to a point will probably be working at scale in 29. And then what we spoke about before we started this recording was when we put quantum together with AI and the strides we're making now in AI, that's when the future really gets uncertain and different. I'd love to ask you to both talk a bit about how you see the journey with AI now and what's happening. And then we close with the conversation around how quantum and AI will completely together change how the world works.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of hold this, I don't know if it's unpopular, or controversial view that AI today is it's interesting and it is super impressive, but it's not world changing yet. Yeah. And I think I said to you earlier, you know, you go to conferences and people always trot out this same line of like, well, you're going to do drug discovery. And I say, so what drugs has it discovered? And the answer is none. Yeah. Because it doesn't have that ability today. And we don't have the computing power for that today. That unlock moment is going to be when AI and quantum come together. And there's this, I mean, the people listening and watching this, go look at how LLMs become LQMs that allow then you to bring that true reasoning and thought process into quantum that allows, because the power of quantum is that it can come up with all the conclusions at the same time. Yeah. So it can then say, what is the drug that we should pursue to put into trials, rather than like, here's 100 possibilities. And that computing power, it then becomes almost unlimited. And I think that's going to be a real pivotal moment in not just quantum, but AI as well, when you put the two together. That's going to be a massive unlock.
Is it, in your mind, fair to say that what we're doing now with AI is a perfect preparation to really unlock the big change when we get quantum working fully, but now it's still a bit sandboxing compared to where we will get to in the future?
Enterprises are going to be slow and slightly cautious in adopting it, although they talk a good story externally. When you're inside organizations, I think it's mostly experimentation today. Yeah. And they, as I said, they're relying on a lot of the enterprise vendors to kind of safely try and get it to them, and on that side. But AI today, when you look at the ability to crunch information, come to conclusions, give guidance, automate the products, you know, with me, Claude enables me to manipulate Excel so that it feels kind of prehistoric actually going into Excel now. You know, those are sort of moments that allow you to kind of get to that productivity level that we couldn't even think of before. I mean, there's a whole ramifications on that we could talk about entry-level jobs, graduate jobs, which industry is at risk, all those sorts of things. But I think that is a big productivity gain. The next part then is we've talked about the offensive use of AI as well, is quantum also has a whole industry that is immature. So if you think about, we take for granted computers today have operating systems with AI, with load balancing in data centers, et cetera, et cetera. All of that's still got to be thought through for quantum yet. So, there's still a way to go to figure all that out. But by the way, that's a massive investing opportunity in Europe. So if you look at Oxford Ionics, a company here in the UK, bought for $1 billion by IonQ. What's fascinating about quantum, just a quick diversion here, is although Google and IBM are very much, leading voices and a lot of kind of direction setting, the real innovation is coming from the smaller companies. So the Rigettis, the IonQs, the D-Waves, and these companies, it kind of feels like going back to the start of, computing as we know it, where the big breakthroughs came from tiny companies like Apple that started in the garage in California that now, are 50 years old and celebrated their birthday. We'll look back at this moment and think one of those little companies somewhere will have broken through and become, the preeminent quantum company. And the one thing about tech shifts is that the leader in one big tech movement doesn't necessarily become the leader in the next. And there are very few companies that manage to navigate between these super cycles as they go from one to the next successfully. IBM's kind of arguably done it, Oracle's arguably done it, but there are a lot of companies that died along the way. But I look at Europe and I think that whole build out of that infrastructure stack is just there for it's wide open. And all of a sudden, it's cool in Europe, have you noticed, to invest in infrastructure and hardware? No one would have touched that 2 years ago. They would never gone near it. It's too uncertain, very long development cycles, capital intensive. They would have said, no, we're not going to go there. People are fighting now over investing in hardware companies and infra. Again, things change quickly, right?
I want to ask you about Notion as an enterprise SaaS investor and coupling that with quantum, which Arqit is obviously active in, and you care a lot about. We have actually quite a few smaller firms coming up in quantum, and we also have two very well-sized funds now, Quantum Nation being one of them. I'd love to ask you, how do you think about the space of quantum and whether it needs a specialized investor or an investor like Notion can really act in it, and what does it require for a generalist investor to be playing in this space?
I'm smiling because I always think about the first time you show someone a quantum computer, because they expect it to be like a beige box, a bit like a data center, and they see it looks like a kind of nice chandelier in a hotel lobby, and they look at it like that's it. You're like, there it is, because it just doesn't look like a computer, right? It looks like a piece of art almost, And then you explain to them like, hey, this computer, just the slightest gust of wind or change in temperature will throw off its results completely. Yeah. And he spends half his time fixing those errors. And they're like, well, that's not great either, is it? Yeah. And then you explain how the thing works and the kind of this massive parallelization. And they go, well, that doesn't make sense, But at the fundamental part of it is there are a number of competing views still about fundamental architecture issues within quantum. So you have some of the companies doing trapped ion. I'm not going to get into this. Go and look at it, but it's fascinating. There's trapped ion. They're superconducting, and then in Europe we've got neural atoms, which is becoming more and more popular. Can they all coexist? I don't know. And will there be one winner? Maybe. I'm not really sure. But when you look at it, there's still some fundamental decisions to be made about architecturally how the computers get built, how they become reliable. So there's a difference between what they call physical qubits. So the power of a quantum computer is measured in qubits. You have physical qubits and logical qubits, because the error correction has to fix the problems that have come through because of the things that I just talked about earlier. So there's a lot of error correction going on. Google now think that you could probably break all known encryption with 10,000 qubits. And some of these computers are reliably getting up towards, 10,000 fault-tolerant qubits. In Europe as well, we have the adjacent technologies right next to this is obviously all the software and platforms that need to sit on quantum. And I think that's wide open. Someone could come along and be, they could be the next Linux of quantum, just putting it simply. So there's that side. And then the other fascinating side is sensing, quantum sensing, because quantum, I don't know if you've seen, but one of the big areas that quantum's had a breakthrough is GPS can be hacked and manipulated. And especially in military situations, a ship or an aircraft could think it's somewhere when it's not, because its GPS has been hacked, and then they can say, hey, you're in our territory. Quantum sensing is that the magnetic field of the Earth is so precise that you can navigate using it now, using quantum. So there are companies doing spin-offs of quantum sensing as well to allow you to do things like navigation around the planet using the Earth's magnetic field. So all of these parts of quantum, we've got a lot of AI engineers, we've got a lot of great data scientists, but we also have amazing quantum physicists, so I think Oxford Ionics being bought for $1 billion shows the kind of quality of people we've got. And then you look at all the other areas where the components of the final computer can still be made here in Europe with some of our leading physicists. So from a fund perspective, you do need to have an appreciation of what I just said to put it in context, if you see what I'm saying, because if you'd have been an investor early in a programming language or an operating system, it would have been a leap of faith if you hadn't understood kind of what came before and put it in context. I was always frustrated with Europe, by the way, because when you're in the US, it tended to be ex-operators and builders that wanted to kind of, carry that forward and help. And we seem to have it a little bit backward in Europe because we didn't have that bench strength yet of operators, that it was kind of mostly financial people. Now, if you invest in quantum on a spreadsheet, you're probably not going to invest, right? Because that leap of faith that you need to have in there that, hey, this is going to be huge. I think the fact that we've got so many exited founders now, the fact that I'm meeting so many second-time founders, which is great, who know that, understand the complexity, understand the risk, but say, I absolutely get the outcome that goes with that. So I think it will be a combination, I'm sure, of specialist funds, because the vast majority of IPOs that are happening in tech right now are in quantum. Inflection just went public. You've got a few different IPOs being lined up right now. And our problem in VC right now, the biggest problem, is liquidity. Okay. So if you want liquidity, you've got a space here that has got a lot of activity in terms of going public.
Yeah. No, it's incredibly interesting. And it was really cool to hear your perspective on specialist funds versus generalist funds. Obviously, you representing also a generalist, as we kind of call it, because, but you've kind of been a specialist in the biggest space in venture for a long time. And sometimes I meet people like you that just surprise me incredibly with just how much you know about so many different things. I want to ask you before we close, what makes you so curious that you, on the one hand, run a big public company in quantum security, and on the other hand, are investing actively with Notion in all kinds of things that have nothing to do with that, and you have very developed views on quantum, which, while you do security, you don't need to know stuff about a quantum computer, really.
I think I've talked to quite a few people about different things, and in investing, and I think once you lose that curiosity, that's the time to kind of stop, because to me, I had breakfast with founders, and one of the recent companies I invested in, Origin, Chris Bruce there is a second-time founder, and I had breakfast with him, and he was beyond excited about how he discovered AI could completely rebuild the industry they did do so well, in employee benefits. And moments like that, I just sit there open mouth thinking, this is what I'm here for. Yeah. This is the bit where he knows, as a second-time founder, that if he gets the right people in the right room with this technology, he can unlock massive amounts of value very quickly, And just by the way, this morning I was looking at how long it took Salesforce to go to 10 billion of revenue and how long it's taken Anthropic. Those timescales are just getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, And then the theoretical $1 billion company, one-person company, you would have laughed about that a couple of years ago. I think it could happen now, I always think it could happen that one person that had that drive and smarts could potentially do it. So we're just in these shifts where you go from one piece of tech to the next are just unlocking enormous opportunity for people. I will never cease to be amazed by that. When I do, it's time to just go sit in the garden and, read books and stare at the sun.
Yeah, I'm getting quite close to Dave Bailey, who previously founded Delivery Hero, but now runs Founder Coach. And we just spoke about the other day, the way he put it was, honestly, Andreas, I think there's a very clear path to anyone being able to give the same output as an individual as 20 people, at least with AI. And that's as a complete non-coder, no smart person, just sitting there with Claude and thinking through, how do I make myself more productive? So it is really a fascinating time. He's coming at our summit as well. I hope you will as well. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I could talk with you for hours and hours, and I hope that a lot of people out there enjoyed today's conversation.
It's been great. Thank you so much for inviting me. Appreciate it.